our comrade and brother Gerard from the DSA, who's going to share a couple of words. Gerard?
Hello, comrades. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today as we honor Martin Luther King Jr.'s anti-militarist legacy. My name is Gerard. I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, currently on the leadership of the NYC DSA Anti-War Working Group and an organizer with the DSA International Committee. I want to speak a few words today about the anti-war organizing that we've been doing. And as someone who grew up in Romania, a short drive to Ukraine, and with family from Ukraine, I felt a personal urgency of needing a real anti-war response to this crisis. Since before the invasion, DSA worked alongside over 100 anti-war organizations against the dangers of rising militarism and U.S. brinkmanship with Russia. In February, DSA condemned Russia's invasion and stressed the need for a diplomatic solution and ceasefire to de-escalate and resolve the crisis instead of just endless militarism. For this, we were relentlessly attacked by every mainstream media outlet and pundit for opposing the war drive and calling out the role of the U.S. and NATO, and by reaffirming our stance for the U.S. to withdraw from NATO and end the imperialist expansionism that helped set the stage for this war. Back then, DSA underscored the need for a global anti-war response, demanding de-escalation, international cooperation, and opposition to sanctions and militarization. Almost a year later, these anti-war calls are as needed as ever, which is why we continue to organize against militarism and coordinate with left-wing anti-war movements around the world. We've seen how these conversations around this war have been weaponized to shut down any dissent. They want to make it seem like anti-war stances across the world are suddenly fringe ideas and that only unquestioning support for endless militarism is acceptable. Last month, Congress passed an omnibus bill with a record high $860 billion military budget, an $80 billion increase from last year, as well as $47 billion in new funds for the war in Ukraine, putting total U.S. spending for the war at over $115 billion. Over $80 billion of that for military spending, making this the largest single-year military spending increase in history. And they want you to think it's treasonous to speak out against it in any way. While the U.S. pours over $1 trillion per year into war and military, living conditions for working class people here deteriorate as they faced high costs of living, healthcare precarity, stagnating wages, police and carceral brutality, and the largest decline in life expectancy in U.S. history. Almost a year after the invasion, people in Ukraine are faced with devastating harm from the war, as well as attacks on their labor and political rights from their own government and the grim prospects of the coming neoliberal reconstruction schemes. I was in Romania in September and saw the economic impacts outside Ukraine as people in the region and across the world are faced with serious cost of living crisis, severely exacerbated by the war. The conversations I had there were understanding of the need to de-escalate this conflict and avoid a prolonged and expanded war. The people in Ukraine and the war-torn regions also agree on this need for negotiations. As the U.S. is increasing the extent of weapon systems it's delivering to Ukraine, including Patriot missiles and tanks, we are continually faced with the possibility of escalation towards a more devastating war and even nuclear catastrophe. It's crucial for us in the U.S. to speak against militarism, to highlight these roles of the U.S. and NATO that they have played in the conflict, and stress the need for a serious diplomatic efforts to avert catastrophe. If the U.S. wanted, it could negotiate with Russia around its own massive military presence in Europe, such as the new major U.S. military base being built in Poland, 100 miles from Russia's border, able to deploy nuclear missiles, large-scale military deployment and exercises across the continent, and major upgrading of the U.S. nuclear arsenal in Europe. However, we know it benefits U.S. interests to keep this war going, so instead we must organize working-class people to speak out. To build towards a mass socialist anti-war movement, we must all be involved. So I hope you might join us to continue this work. And I thank you all for being here on this cold day. You can find more resources in our organizing at dsaic.org/Ukraine. Thank you all.
Yay! Thanks for joining.
Give it up for Gerard one more time.
For a little bit now.